21% said their agencies hadn't started to plan.
You could change the federal retirement system. The chief of naval operations says all the Navy's investigations into
the Office of Personnel Management wants to know what federal employees think of their benefits.
Welcome to the Federal Leaders Playbook, where high performers in the public sector can push their career forward by learning about the trends, innovation, and technology advancing agency performance. We're kicking off Season 1 by exploring the world of IT service management. We're talking about how federal IT organizations are evolving to manage budget cuts, security breaches, and ever-increasing service demands. Here we go.
Welcome. Before we dive in, let's go around and do some introductions.
I'm Eric Lazarson, the Vice President of our Service Management Practice at Acuity.
Carrie Postorero, Managing Director at Acuity.
I am Jessica Alfaro, Senior Manager at Acuity.
I'm Tom Hamill, the Senior Technical Manager. We also have a special guest with us today, Brian Shealy with Kinetic Data. Brian, you want to do some introductions?
Yeah, I'm Brian Shealy. I'm the Global Director of Strategy, Solutions, and Sales with Kinetic Data. Do you guys want to talk about garbage in, garbage out?
Yeah.
We can certainly talk about garbage.
We can do garbage in, garbage out.
I mean, it definitely plays into the CMDB thing, right?
I think it plays into the CMDB. You talk a lot about these tools all kind of having the same thing. Incident management. You don't want to be the best at incident management, although some people think they do, right? But the overall goal is not to crush incident management or to crush CMDB. Let's be the best. It's to improve the service that you're providing to your end users. When we talk about going through that process and what those tools can capture, I think it needs to be talked about. You said process, kind of drives everything. That process and the information that you're actually going to put in that system, it matters. Because if you don't take the time to train your user base on what information is relevant, how to input it in the correct space, where to put it in there correctly, these systems are extremely complex. It's easy, and Jessica could tell some stories, it's easy to record information in the wrong place, and then that's missing from your output. So you may run a report to look at a certain service to see what components make it up. But if somebody represented something within that, whether it's a networking device that's kind of holding it all together, but they recorded it somewhere else, you're going to get incorrect information out. It's tough to rely on those reports if you're not kind of governing the information going in.
Right, and that speaks to the point that we made at the beginning, which is process drives everything. How do you rediscover on some sort of regularity and reconcile what that discovery is about, and then sizing things accordingly, right? If you manage 5,000 CIs in your environment, that's a lot different than managing 500,000 CIs. And then also, what is the governance of that and the processes that attribute to the governance of those CIs as well?
Yeah, I think there's agreement on multiple fronts on the importance of a CMDB, but it kind of remains something elusive to most organizations. And I think they underestimate the level of effort needed. You don't just set up some automation and walk away. You still have to think. You still have to look at what's happening and make decisions from it. I think there's a big gap in, I want this, partially because people around me are saying, I need it, or maybe I do see a lot of value in it, but I didn't think it would be so hard. I didn't think it would be so time consuming. I thought integration with other tools would make this easier, and that's not always the case.
Yeah, if you guys want to talk about the CMDB for a minute, there's a couple interesting things.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so I'll share some opinions and kind of, I guess, perspectives on the CMDB. So, like I said, Tom and I worked for a provider, an integrator in the space years ago. That's where we met, and so 12 years later, at that time, ITIL coming out, and it was ITIL. I think I'm certified in version 2 and 3. You guys are probably version 2 and 3 as well. I don't think version 1 really happened in the United States that I'm aware of.
It was very early. It was very early.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever met anybody that was a version 1.
I certainly have.
Okay.
But that was during my HP days, where a lot of our presence was in the UK.
Okay. So, right, of course. So as a thought leader, they probably were driving that framework.
Yep.
So the whole concept of the CMDB, I think, was apparent in version 2, and in version 3 even more apparent, right? And the idea of good practices and having a repository of data that is your golden record, if you will, records of your landscape through tracking CIs and the relevant attributes and metadata around that data. My opinion on the CMDB is it is like chasing a ghost. And the reason for it is, especially now, we've moved to a much different landscape, right? And just from a service perspective, everybody's got at least one smart device, if not multiples. So the average person that used to have a CI you would track in the form of a desktop or a laptop, now you're tracking some multiple of that, of things that are touching your network and touching your systems. But I think the concept of the CMDB has stayed the same, where it is that golden record. So what am I getting at? I'm getting at that I think that what we're going to see is there's going to be a much larger kind of, I'll call it a big data approach to the CMDB, the way that they're logically constructed, the way that federation happens, the way that you can use advanced technologies, things that are out there, different database types, distributed databases, using things like Hadoop and big data reconciliation engines. I think that what we're going to see is a new set of tools emerging here soon, which will allow the multitude of data and CI-related information to be more accurately passed and faster, closer to real time. Yep. And that's one of the big things is the amount of data is incredible because we're able to track everything. But just thinking about it from the perspective of the CMDB, you have these architectures that are the relational database architectures, right? Mm-hmm. And when you get into reconciliation and you have something sniffing across the network and sending data back, we've got latency and bandwidth issues, and that have existed forever. And you can't just put a fatter pipe, right? That doesn't always work. It's not. Right. Sometimes it's not possible. Many times it's way too expensive. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, you can't even process the amount of data with the tool sets that you have. So putting a fatter pipe doesn't matter anyway. So how do you solve this? I think that the technology will change. And I think the idea of chasing that ghost of a CMDB will, in the next couple of years, I think we're going to see some vendors that will disrupt that. And the other side of it is, if you think about it from the customer perspective, I don't think customers care as much about the CI itself. I think they care about the service they're receiving. So the other thing that with this whole move to these as-a-service models with tools themselves, I believe that, so Jess has an Apple device sitting here, right? An iPhone something or other, or is it an Android? I can't tell. It's you have a smartphone.
She's an Android.
Right. But if you think about
her.
So just talking about that from a service perspective, that's your communication device. It's your communication service. That is your means to that. I don't think you actually care about your phone so much as you care about the ability to communicate, text, talk. So the point of it is that I think that we're going to see evolution on two spots. I think we're going to see the models, the tool models of the CMDB probably change. And you do need a lot of that underlying data. Don't get me wrong. But I think that a more modern approach to IT service management should be service focused and less focused on the actual depth of data. Like if you treat the service as a holistic thing, so this is my customer, she has a communication service, it has an issue. Well, how do you fix that issue? We can fix the phone, we can replace the phone, we can do all kinds of different things with that. Or the issue may just be the network, whatever. But I think that we're going to see both a change in the approach to doing the CMDB as a strategy, but also the technical side in supporting it. That's what I believe will happen.
And I agree with that. I think that CMDB, you call it a ghost, you call it, and we've chatted about that in different sessions on the podcast about the CMDB and the difficulty of finding it. What I think also, you talk about tracking down to the device level, which putting that in the CMDB just increases that amount of data through the roof that the current tools, I agree, can't keep up with. The reconciliation time, if it takes you a day to reconcile multiple data feeds, that information is out of date and irrelevant. So what a lot of organizations have done is just kind of capped it at let's look at just kind of that data center aspect of it, or the comm. So not to the device level, but as soon as that device communicates with the network, I can track it from there. I think that's something they can do and should be doing today. But I agree, there needs to be some disruption to handle all of this information to make that data available in a kind of a single view, whether it's a federated, source, it doesn't matter, but it needs to be in that view that then's usable, that information is consumable through the rest of your tool set.
I mean, does that go back to where you have to kind of take stock in the tools you have and will they fit the future? And now are we back to consistently buying new tools to keep up with the technology? And do you see some of these vendors trying to gear themselves towards the future so they can take in all this data, can do reconciliation without failing? And
yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I'm the right person to answer that because, we see the way that it works in my world is we're specifically focused on providing typically a customer experience.
Right.
So I was working with a customer today in Europe, and they have a need to streamline the way that not their end customers are doing things. What they need is a way to streamline the intake of service requests and calls and things like that to a call center. So the customer of our tool set would actually be a call center agent, right? And you could ask, well, why wouldn't you use an ITSM tool for that? Well, it's not all IT services they're providing. And what that customer service person is actually doing is they're working within 5 tools. They're working within a CRM system, an ITSM system, a bunch of custom stuff, custom business applications. And then they're also working, they have to, look up billing data for, the customer. So we kind of touch the back ends, like when we're meeting and having that kind of a conversation. We're talking more about, can we integrate and how do we achieve that integration level? So I don't really know what people are doing these days in terms of, which vendor's doing X, Y, Z, and specific to that. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, the perspective that you're bringing, that I think there is a gap in what current tools provide from a CMDB perspective. There's definitely room for improvement. And I think maybe that goes back to what we were talking about earlier in one of our previous sessions, where we were saying that CMDB is one of those things that it's difficult to gain customer adoption. And what you just said, it's a ghost, right? So they're trying to chase this thing and they're not able to realize the true value of it. So the output of that, I think, is another part of what the visualization of what all that information looks like. Like, what is the right level to show end users, to show senior management? There's so much data that you're putting into this thing, and having that visualization of what it is that you're looking at, that is a gap. I don't see tools doing that very well.
You're talking about in terms of the IT service management space?
Right.
I would agree with you from my perspective, but I think one very interesting thing is, we're, as human beings, I believe that we're driven by what we do in our everyday life. And I think that's one of the things that drives behaviors within business tool sets. So your point being that you can't visualize what's going on, right? It's kind of high level. If you think about it from your everyday life, I'll bet you feel that you have a much better perspective, for example, in your banking, which, these days banking is where everybody's using credit cards. There's a lot of data transacting across banking. So you can go into your banking system as a customer of the banking system and see, where did you spend money, and look at reports and the visualization and things. And you're saying to me that you can't do that in
CMDB.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, just because we're focusing on CMDB and
but I believe what's going to happen is people are going to realize very soon, and I'm sure there's vendors doing it, but I think it's going to become more apparent, especially in this space, where people are going to go, well, I can do this in my banking. Why can't I do this? And a vendor's going to go, well, we can, and we enable it. And I think that in the next, 18 months or something, we'll see probably more of that type of visualization. Because I think it's important, having a context of what's going on, not just the data of what's going on. You have to be able to contextualize it with visualization and other things.
Yes, in a way, that's a challenge in the federal space, keeping up with what's happening outside. So you say the banking, I can go in the bank and then pull up a report and visualize where I'm spending that money, restaurant, lot on Amazon or what have you. But
That's a great point.
The government being a little bit behind may not have those tools to bring up the visualization or...
Right. Your bank is giving you that personal experience in a technical environment, especially when you're scanning the network for information. What you're pulling back isn't just my personal information. It's everybody in this room, in this building, in this county, in this, right? And it's overload. So when I don't approach that kind of data collection with a point and I just take whatever I can get, I kind of get lost and stuck in that volume of information back, and I'm not sure what to do with it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of data out there.
There's a lot of data.
Yeah, so I think just hearing the conversation, it sounds like the tool is usually not the issue. It's the process, it's the communication, it's the governance around it. We're not in the business of being the best at incident management. We want to be the best at service delivery and enabling service delivery.
We've talked in other podcasts about our Acuity's approach to kind of the assessment conversation, the tools analysis, identifying the gaps. We are, partners with multiple service management vendors and recognize that each one of them have strengths that could be beneficial for certain customers. So I think it's a case by case, you have to really get to know that customer. How much have they invested in their current tool set? Do they have multiple tools doing duplicative things? And is there an opportunity for consolidation? And I think that's one of those kind of initial conversations you can have and just ask. We've got about 10 questions we'll ask you, and depending, it kind of spits out it's usually an obvious answer. And I would say most of the time the answer is stick with what you got. Let's improve your process. Let's get out there and communicate the fact that you have this tool, you've made this investment. We find that the functionality usage in these big enterprise tools is, 10, 15% of the total functionality available. So you're missing out on lots of opportunities to automate, lots of opportunities to, do some pretty cool things. We talk about visualization. Some of these tools have it. You just need to get the information in the right space. You gotta ask some experts on the tool how to really leverage that. So I would say it's pretty straightforward, but not everybody's willing to have that conversation. They've been through some rough times with their existing tools, and they're looking at that shiny object and saying, "Hey, that'll solve my problems, or maybe that'll get my boss off me for a few years." I don't know.
Yeah. I think it comes back to process drives everything.
Process drives
because
everything.
it really
Thanks,
does.
Brian.
Swapping out the technology and not changing behavior, you're going to continue to get the same results.
So I have one last question for you guys. So when I started in this business, and I think you guys will probably agree that 12 years ago or 15 years ago, there was this concept in enterprise IT shops of having a single vendor, right? Single throat to choke, if you will. I came from the sales side, so it was often I was the throat to grab. But what are your feelings today on bringing in best of breed solutions and architecting for key functionality in certain areas versus sticking with a single vendor? What do you guys think about that?
We touched on that in an earlier podcast, but I think we feel like it's going towards that best of breed, where they're looking at a tool for a certain piece of it that does it really well. It may have the capability to do another process or another piece, but they may bring in another tool for that. So I think we're seeing that more and more.
Cool.
Yeah.
Are you seeing it as like ancillary value or added value? So they have, I don't know, we'll call it a ITSM system, and they want to do better something like notifications for outages and things like that. And they'll bring in a tool set specific to that because it can plug in and integrate? Is that the kind of thing you're saying? Like that's a key part of the way that they deliver, and they have to have that right. So rather than get a whole new system, they're just going to get one system that does the notification and that sort of thing. Is that what you're saying?
I would say we're seeing a combination of things. We see, as we kind of analyze these tools, we see people uncovering functionality they didn't know existed. And then they're like, well, let's try and make this work. And then they realize that vendor didn't really spend a whole lot of time building out that functionality, so it's limited. That then drives them to go look for something best of breed in that space, because now you have a justification for, okay, we have a software application here. It does this really well. When it gets into this space, it's kind of limited, kind of weak. So I see that as somewhere where we start to go off and do that best of breed analysis and bringing in other tools. But yeah, it's challenging because in the same sentence, you hear what the software vendors are doing, and I've seen players not in the ITSM space. Let's say they're in the system monitoring space, and they'll sell a big enterprise system monitoring tool and then say, hey, by the way, government buyer, we also have an ITSM application that just bolts on, and we'll give that to you for free.
Right.
Unfortunately, folks kind of fall for that. They're looking for the best value, but a lot of times the level of effort to get that application to do what some of those best of breed applications do will far exceed the amount of money you would spend on bringing in best of breed.
Okay. Brian, thank you so much for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me.
I really enjoyed it.
Enjoyed to talk to my friends at Acuity.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
Come back.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everyone. If you're interested in today's discussion, we invite you to read our show note and download additional free tools and resources at federalleadersplaybook.com. To learn more about Acuity or to contact any of us directly, visit Acuity's website at myacuity.com.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Leaders Playbook. Check out our next episode, subscribe, and visit federalleadersplaybook.com for more great content. See you next time.